So we've finally arrived to just a couple of days before the US presidential election, where Democrat Kamala Harris squaring off against Republican nominee Donald Trump. This is going to be an extremely close election by all indicators. Joining me now is Ambassador Meera Shankar, India's former envoy to America, to help us understand the two candidates, where the election is right now, and how these two leaders are likely to work with India, as well as a larger approach to other diplomatic and foreign policy challenges should they be elected to the White House. Ambassador Shankar, thank you so much for joining us. Could I ask you to begin by laying out the state of play in the election right now? Some are calling this the closest presidential election in living memory. Your view on where the election stands right now, just a day or so before the polls close?
Well, it is really down to the wire. No one has been able to predict the outcome with any degree of definiteness. Kamala remains ahead in the national polls by and large on an average, but her lead has come down to 1% as an average, which makes it very close to call. In the swing states, there are conflicting polls, but it appears to be a dead heat. The latest New York Times Siena poll shows Kamala ahead marginally. I think in Nevada, Wisconsin, and North Carolina, and in the key states of Michigan and Pennsylvania and Georgia, there appears to be a tie. And then in Arizona, Trump is ahead. But all these, the margins are so close, 1%, sometimes 2%, that it's all within the margin of error. So it really depends on how the turnout goes. 76 million people have already cast early votes. So half the electorate or so remains to cast their vote.
Right.
And they will be voting. But it's too close to call or to give a definite opinion in terms of which way it's likely to go.
Well, Ambassador, you're saying very rightly that it's too early to say, how the election will go. But if I could ask you to perhaps lay out some of the differences for us between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Lots of Indians will be tuning in to the election, would want to be introduced to the two candidates, their distinctive views on how they approach the world, foreign policy, India, and other key issues. So could I ask you to perhaps lay out the differences between Kamala Harris and the Democrats, as well as Donald Trump and the Republicans? What could we expect from both sides in terms of their approaches to the world and their vision for where America should go as a global power?
Look, first of all, let me say that foreign policy has not been a key element in this election. It's been domestic policy, though the issues which have been thrown up are, in a sense, linked to foreign policy, because illegal immigration, is linked to the world situation. And that is one of the issues which Donald Trump has made a key issue, saying he's going to undertake mass deportation and that he will also, deal not just with those people apprehended at the border, but also anywhere between the 11 to, they say, 12, 14, 15 million, the figures keep varying, people who are there in the US already illegally, and that he will use the army and the National Guards and so on for this purpose. So it does have international ramifications. And along with this, he promises to also tighten the legal visa regime. So our companies who use H-1B visas to send software or IT experts in pursuit of business contracts with American companies may find that the process has become far more troublesome and might take longer for processing to occur, and so on. President Trump has a more isolationist view of US foreign policy. He is not going to be so actively engaged in crisis situations and could change, for instance, the policy on Ukraine. On Israel, we don't know what he will do, but he has very close ties with Netanyahu and could give him a free hand. So we don't know if that will lead to more instability there. For the Biden administration and for Kamala, I think they have taken a more active interest in the world, reasserting America's leadership of NATO, supporting the alliance, the NATO alliance in the confrontation with Ukraine and in Ukraine with Russia. They've also given support to Israel in the Middle East. But otherwise, in the Indo-Pacific, I think they've taken a lot of steps to build an institutional framework which will balance China in this region, including the elevation of the Quad to summit level, the setting up of AUKUS, the US, Japan, South Korea trilateral, the renegotiation of the defense agreement with Philippines, and the US, India, Israel, UAE conglomeration in West Asia. So they have taken a number of steps to build institutional ability to balance China in the Indo-Pacific. Now we have to see if that continues under Trump. For all Americans, actually, the economy has been the number one issue. And here, though Biden has handled the economy quite skillfully because he's brought down inflation, it's been tamed, it's now closer to 2%, and the Fed has started cutting interest rates a bit. And at the same time, the US has not gone into recession. Unemployment figures have been low, wages have been rising. Still, that has not translated into a feel-good factor with the public at large because of high inflation in the initial 2.5 years of the Biden administration. People still feel the pinch in terms of their mortgages, where, mortgage payments have increased, and in terms of buying daily use products. So the economy has been a key issue for Kamala Harris, where she has said that she is going to create an economy which is an economy of opportunity that works for the middle class. All her schemes, which she has announced, basically look at increasing taxes for those whose incomes are more than $400,000 a year, but not increasing income tax for those who earn below, giving child tax credits for first-time children, for a first-time child, and extending credits for other children, providing assistance to first-time home buyers, and providing credits to small business owners to start up their companies, and also bringing down the cost of ordinary day-to-day consumer goods which households need, as well as bringing down the cost of housing by increasing the housing pool through giving incentives to the private sector to build more homes. Now, Trump is seen as better for the economy in popular polls, because before COVID, the economy under Trump was also doing quite well. But by the end of the COVID dip, it was not so rosy. He is promising tax cuts, to extend tax cuts for the very rich and the middle class, but it didn't really, his last set of tax cuts provided no tax deductions or revisions for the lowest segment of income holders. They were the ones who were not touched. And increasing tariffs. Now, he has said that he will put a 10 to 20% tariff across the board and more against those who, have high tariffs themselves. And here he's identified India as being very tough on tariffs. And of course, with China, he promises to impose tariffs of 50 to 60% or even more if required. When asked how he will deal with the housing crisis, he says he will provide more funds through the tariffs which are raised and which will generate revenue. Now, economists in the US have said that both sides, economic plans could increase the US deficit, though Trump's plan would increase it by a far greater order of magnitude. Kamala's would increase it by less.
Right.
And so that's on the economy. Now, as I said, for Trump, immigration has been a big thing, and for his supporters. And unfortunately, there's an undercurrent of racism there. Many members of the Indian American community or Indian techie green card holders have been trolled by MAGA supporters, saying the whole lot of you will be deported, once Trump is president and so on. So there is an undercurrent of racism, which, is there when they talk of dealing with illegal immigration, because legal immigration is confused with illegal immigration, and the color of the skin, it seems, matters.
Right. Ambassador, if I could ask you, now that you mentioned immigration, if I could ask you about Donald Trump and his candidacy and how India is likely to look at him. On the positive side of the ledger, when he was president, of course, we had a fairly strong relationship with the United States. He, of course, helped revive the Quad. We had a stronger defense relationship with the Americans. He was, of course, also seen as tough on China. So that's on the positive side of the ledger when Indians look at Donald Trump. But also on the negative side of the ledger, there are claims or promises that he's made to slap 20% tariffs on all goods coming to the United States, which would negatively impact Indian goods as well. You were talking about immigration. While he was president, he made it much harder for Indians to get H-1B visas, green cards and so on. He called the H-1B system a theft of American prosperity. So on some issues, it really seems like he's quite a hardliner in ways that would impact Indians negatively. Could I ask you to help us make sense of Donald Trump as a candidate? Would he be good for India? How is he likely to look at India if he were to be elected to the White House again?
Look, both the Republicans and the Democrats want to build a stronger relationship with India based on their increasing strategic convergence in the Indo-Pacific and the challenge posed by an increasingly assertive and even sometimes aggressive China. So that is going to continue irrespective of whether it is Trump or Kamala Harris. During the last Trump presidency, there was a sense that Trump had been tough on Pakistan initially and also tough on China because he introduced the tariffs for the first time on a certain set of Chinese exports to the United States. And his rhetoric on China was pretty tough. With India, he visited India, and there seemed to be a greater kind of ideological convergence, or at least a closeness between the government in India and President Trump. So that's a plus. But at the same time, Trump is known for having transactional relationships, and there was considerable trade friction during his first administration, withdrawal of the GSP zero duty scheme for certain Indian exports, tightening of H-1B visas, levying of duties on Indian aluminium and steel exports to the US, going to the WTO for withdrawal of India's, developing country status, and so on. So trade frictions continued under Donald Trump. Under the Biden administration, and we should expect a degree of continuity if Kamala Harris is elected, the strategic relationship has strengthened because we are now part of the Quad at summit level. We are invited at summit level as a special invitee. We've been invited to the G8 meetings. We have the new initiatives on critical and emerging technologies, including for joint production of jet fighters, the GE-414. So the relationship has strengthened and solidified, actually, beyond the rhetoric. I think it's become more institutional and more solid in a sense. Trade frictions were eased because both countries were able to resolve 6 WTO disputes bilaterally, and it reduced in the salience that it had, these trade differences, under the Trump administration. Also, the H-1B visa process became easier. And so the trade relationship has been going well, with the two countries crossing $200 billion in trade in goods and services. Even under Trump, I have to mention that despite the trade policy action which his administration took against India, in real terms, the trade relationship continued to grow. For Kamala Harris, I think I should mention, beyond the economy, women's rights over their bodies has become a core issue ever since the judgment reversing Roe versus Wade by the US Supreme Court turned the clock on the right to abortion, which US women had enjoyed. And by all accounts, women are consolidating behind Kamala Harris because of this issue and because of Trump's other, rather crude remarks against women like Liz Cheney or others where he calls them dumb, promises to have them face, what would they feel if they faced an 8-barrel or whatever rifle, So I think that this has become an important factor in the election. Many older women who tended to go Republican and many white women who earlier also did not so much favor the Democrats have shifted to the Democratic camp. And generally, women voters tend to be more than male voters in the US election. So this has become a very strong factor for the Harris presidency.
Understood. Ambassador, could I also ask you on, you talked about some of the frictions, of course, that we've had in the past on trade with Trump. Could I ask you on the other side, with the Biden administration, of course, we appreciate that both Trump and the Biden-Harris administration have done reasonably well on the relationship with India. But if I'm going to ask you, when it comes to Biden and Kamala Harris and the Democrats, there have been some points of friction. We had the situation in Bangladesh, the fall of Sheikh Hasina's government in August. Several people in India are convinced that America has neglected India's interests on that front. You had early on in the tenure of the Biden administration, you had Afghanistan the fall of Afghanistan, which many people felt was mishandled again by the Biden-Harris administration. Some questions, of course, now about the Pannu murder for hire case and whether the US government takes the Khalistan issue as seriously as we would like them to. So some friction seem to have crept in. Could I ask you perhaps to address some of these concerns that some people have that, when it comes to the Democrats, we often have these questions about political interference on matters of democracy, of human rights. Kamala Harris, as a senator, commented on India's handling of the abrogation of Article 370 back in 2019. So could I ask you to unpack some of the skepticism that sometimes creeps in about the Democratic Party, some of the concerns and difficulties we've had with the Biden administration over the last 4 years?
Look, I think the concerns have largely been around, the Democrats' penchant for making human rights and democracy a key priority in many of their foreign relationships. But the Biden administration, despite anxiety on this score, dealt with these issues with a degree of discretion. I have not really heard them raise these issues in public, or if anything has been done, it's been more in the sense of we all need to work to strengthen democracy. From a point of humility, the US also has work to do. But I think in recent days, the Pannoon case has caused concern. But, the US is signaling to us that there's a red line for them. If any action is taken to harm or exterminate any of their citizens on US soil, they will not tolerate it. That's the message that they are sending to us. And the Indian government has also reacted by saying that the individual concerned, who's been named in the US indictment, is no longer in government service. And it's only after that the US made his name public. It's a pity. I wish it could have been handled on both sides with greater discretion and tact. But we are where we are, and I think we must use the full panoply of US law to get across our concerns on the issue of extremist activity by certain Sikhs. Most Sikhs don't subscribe to it, by certain Sikhs in the US and Canada, and that you can't really ignore if somebody is celebrating the murder of an Indian leader or, inciting violent actions in India. I think these are things which cannot be ignored. And I think India has to use all the legal processes available to it to get across our concerns on specific cases where we can provide hard evidence.
And Ambassador, could I ask you also to talk a little bit about specifically the handling of Bangladesh and Afghanistan? Do you see these as causing any long-term tension with the Democratic Party, or do you think that this is perhaps just an episodic difference of interest and approach to a particular crisis and to a particular country?
As far as Afghanistan is concerned, both Trump and the Biden administration really are responsible, because Trump, when he was president, reached out to the Taliban, did a deal with them behind the back of the Afghan government, and laid down deadlines for withdrawal of US troops. He invited the Taliban at that time to Camp David, without even the Afghan government knowing about it. And Biden had this very disorderly withdrawal from Afghanistan. So yes, on Afghanistan, both, in a sense, were driven by the turning opinion in America, where there was just so much fatigue with Afghanistan and no appetite for continuing a military presence there across the board, from Republicans to Democrats. And at some level, if you think of it, the fact that America has withdrawn from Afghanistan has changed the nature of the Afghanistan-Pakistan relationship, where normal and natural strategic and geographic factors are now coming into play. So in that sense, I don't think we can say that it has been something which has worsened India's strategic environment. Indeed, now Pakistan is having to grapple with the issue of violence across its western border in Afghanistan, coming from Afghanistan. As far as Bangladesh is concerned, yes, I think the Democrats had a view of Hasina which was not shared by India, and we consistently did discuss this, but were unable to shift opinion. Partly this flowed from US demands on Bangladesh, situated as it is very strategically in the Bay of Bengal, for facilities in Bangladesh, and partly it flowed from, I think, Hasina's action against Muhammad Yunus, who was a darling of the Western liberal opinion and very close to the Clintons. So there were two factors, I think, which led to an estrangement between Hasina and the Americans. But there were also issues in terms of the authoritarian turn her regime had taken, which was accepted as long as the economy in Bangladesh was doing well, and it was doing very well. But with COVID and then the Ukraine war, they began to face a serious balance of payments crisis. Unemployment went up because garment exports are one of the key employers in Bangladesh. As they fell, there was a serious employment crisis, and the mishandling of this reservation issue, I think, finally propelled the movement, which led to Hasina's ouster. So I wouldn't really say that it's something which was entirely manufactured from outside. There were internal domestic factors at play as well, which allowed an opportunity for others who want to fish in troubled waters.
Understood. Ambassador Shankar, thank you so much for your time, for explaining to our viewers where the election is at this point in time, the differences between Harris and Trump, their outlook on the world, on India, what the key issues will be, and also some of the specific challenges and difficulties we sometimes had with these American administrations. But of course, the big takeaway that we should largely expect a close relationship with the United States, regardless of who ascends to the White House. But thank you so much again, Ambassador, for your time.